Okay, hello everybody. Today we're here in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in Aerosoft's CRJ700. We have a 333 nautical mile flight from India Alpha Delta, Washington Dulles International to Bravo Delta Lima, Bradley International. In my last flight we moved pretty quickly through a cold and dark startup. For this flight it will be more of a tutorial, so we're going to slow things down, let you see each button that I'm clicking, and hear about how I planned out the flight. So let's hop into the flight deck and get started. We're running with real weather, which is pretty miserable today, so we've got some decent rain and low visibility. Should make it interesting for an IFR flight. Normally I have the mouse cursor hidden, but it makes it hard to see what I'm clicking on, and a viewer gave me a tip to turn it on. So for this tutorial, we'll enable the mouse cursor so you can see exactly what I'm doing. We'll start by going over to the EFB and turning it on. Next, we'll make sure that the nose wheel steering is disarmed. We'll toggle the tablet into aircraft mode so we can open the doors later. Now we'll do our safety flows. We'll verify that all 4 hydraulic pumps are off. We'll check that our landing gear is down. Our flaps should be fully up. Our flight spoiler, which is this lever here, should be in the full up position. Our parking brake, which is under the armrest here, needs to be set. The red ADG handle should be flush, and the emergency flap lever should be up. We'll head back up to the electrical panel and turn the battery master switch on. Now we'll head down to the ECAM control panel, and we'll press the electrical pages button. Pressing that once puts it into the AC power mode, so we'll press it a second time, which will put it on the DC page. We're going to verify that there's at least 22 volts for main and APU battery, because we'll need that to start up. We'll go back to ECAM control and put it on status page, and now you can see the status items in green and white. Then we'll head back up to the overhead panel and do our fire test. When we press that button, we'll head back down to the status page, and you can see that the fire system status popped up and cleared, so that's good to go. Now we'll head back up to the overhead, press the APU fuel button, and that'll give us an APU in-byte, which is a diagnostic test, plus APU SOV open, so the APU door is opening up and the tail. Once that's up, we can go and start the APU by pressing the APU start button. So now I've got graphics for the APU. That's the 2 little gauges down there. And it's starting to power up, so you can see the percentage there. Once it gets to 99% for a minimum of 2 seconds, then the aircraft will come alive. All the other screens will come online, and we will be getting power from the APU. So now we just have to sit back and wait. There it is. So now we've got power from the APU. We're going to head down to the lower pedestal and set the 2 IRS dials for the inertial navigation system to nav. There you go. Next, we'll go back up to the overhead and verify that all of our switches are in the correct positions. So we'll verify that the DC service is off, that the battery master is on, and AC is off. The generators should be dark and guarded. AC transfer should be off, and our generator switches should be in auto. The hydraulic shutoff valves, which are below the fire detection, should both be dark and guarded. We'll get our nav lights on and our logo lights on. The fuel boosts should both be off. Everything should be in auto for bleed air. Ignition should all be off. We'll head down to the hydraulic switches, and we're going to switch all of the pumps on except for 3A. So that's the 1st, 3rd, and 4th switches go on. Now we'll head down to the ECAM page and click the hydraulic button to bring up the hydraulic page. It's got a schematic, and the outermost pumps are 1 and 2, and the innermost are 3A and 3B, so we're getting pressure from 1, 2, and 3B. That matches the switches that we flicked. But we don't have anything from 3A. So now we're going to head back up and reverse these. So we're going to put the 3 that we flicked to the auto position, and then we'll turn pump 3A on. So now we're going to verify that pressure is dropping from those other pumps and pressure is being supplied from 3A. Looks good. So now we'll turn 3A back off. Next, on the top right-hand side, we're going to turn on air conditioning packs 1 and 2. We'll turn on the recirc fan, and we'll turn on the aft cargo air conditioning. We'll get on the anti-ice for windshield left and right to low. And we'll bring up the panel lights here on the overhead. It is a dark and dreary day, so that'll help. Next step is to get our lights sorted out. So landing lights are going to be off, nose will be off, recog, ELT should be armed, passenger oxygen is dark and guarded. We'll get the seat belt and no smoking signs on, and emergency lights armed. A few things to verify. We'll head to the panel where the master caution icons are. We'll flip up the stall guard, press and hold it. That'll cause the alarm to go off and also for the controls to shake. Now we'll verify the cockpit voice recorder by pressing and holding the green button here. For 5 seconds, the light should illuminate. We'll verify that our standby altimeter is working. We'll also look at the oxygen on the status page. So go down to the ECAM control panel and click status. And the oxygen is on the right hand side. So that should be green, indicating that it is within range for this flight. And while we're at it, we'll verify that our oxygen is working. So our mask is right here. We'll press and hold the handle. You'll hear it hiss. We'll also check the Skycam by turning it on and flicking it through 1 and 2. That's a little camera outside the cockpit, so you can see who's at the door. And if we look back at our oxygen amount, we could see we lost 10 psi just from doing that test. Okay, next we'll test the anti-skid alarm. We're going to go down and disengage the parking brake. Then we're going to flip the anti-skid button to off, and we'll verify the anti-skid message on the ECAM. Looks good. Now we'll flip it back to armed and put the parking brake back on. Next we'll flick the 2 switches by the overheat alarm and verify that we get cautions on the left display there. And we'll check the lamps by flicking those up and making sure they all illuminate. We'll head to the center pedestal and check these 2 red handles, which are for pitch roll disconnect, and make sure that they are stored. Now we'll check the switches for the spoilers ground lift. They should be set in auto, and we'll go and arm the thrust reversers. The reversers are these 2 white handles on the back of the throttle, so we'll make sure that those are down and stowed. We'll check that our flaps are at 0, and both thrust levers are in idle. Now we'll head down to the RTU, which is the radio display here, hit TCAS auto, press test, and listen for the TCAS test.
TCAS system test OK.
We'll hit return to put that back. We'll head down to the lower pedestal and get the stabilizer trim and the mock trims engaged. We'll get yaw damper 1 and 2 engaged. We'll make sure the fan dials are both to normal. We'll head up to our panel lights here and turn those up since it's dark. Or at least dark and gloomy. The 4 dials below the crew calls panel should be to auto. On the lower right, we'll verify that the 3 black switches are dark and guarded for the cargo fire control. We'll verify that the red handle for the landing gear is stowed, and our ADG handle is flush. Next step is to start getting the CDU set up. We'll wait until we contact clearance to put in the flight plan. So we'll go up here and hit index, position, init, and put in our airport. So we are at Kilo India Alpha Delta. We'll paste that up there. Now we'll hit next page and choose one of the GPS positions the IRS has gotten, copy it, and paste it in the set position fields. That looks good. Now we can hit Index. For Index page, verify IRS control is enabled. Back to Index. Verify VORDME is yes. Back to Index. Go to the GPS control, verify that's enabled. Back to Index. And now we are ready to enter our flight plan. So we'll hit the flight plan key to bring up the flight plan page and enter our origin and destination. So Kilo India Alpha Delta for our departure airport, and Kilo Bravo Delta Lima for our arrival airport. And it's time to board the passengers. So let's head over to the EFB and we'll get all of our doors open so we can start loading up luggage and boarding all of our passengers. So click on the doors, that'll deploy the stairway. We'll get our service and cargo doors open. There's also a doors page on the eCam, so you can bring that up to see the status of the aircraft at any time. DOLA's clearance, Delta 3556, IFR to Bradley, ready to copy. Cleared to Bradley International, climb via the SID, radar vectors RAZA, SWAN, then as filed, maintain 3000, expect 37,000 10 minutes after departure, departure 125.05, squawk 3414, Delta 3556. Although you dial your squawk code on the RTU up here, to actually put it into altitude mode you have to flip the switch to 1 that's by your standby radio here. Okay, before we get everything programmed in the CDU, let me walk you through the details of the flight plan. So we are flying primarily using two Juliet Airways, Juliet 42 and Juliet 222. When you're flying IFR, you're usually getting onto airways and getting off of them at your arrival and departure airports. And when you get on them, you may use a standard instrument departure or a SID to get on them. And when you get off, you may use a standard terminal arrival or a STAR to get off. Airways are a lot like interstates for your car, so you'll get on an interstate at a particular ramp and then you'll get off at a certain exit. Airways generally use VORs or they use RNAV waypoints. So for low altitude airways you have Victor and Tango. Victor is for VOR and the Tango use RNAV. For high altitude airways, which is what we're using, you have Juliet and Quebec. Again, Juliet is for VOR and Quebec is for RNAV. Look at my flight plan. The two airways we're using are connected by Robbinsville and JFK VORs. So they're Juliet Airways, they're using VORs as connecting points. We're flying the Woolly 1 departure. That's for turbojets only. And you know what's interesting about it, it's not until I went to explain it here that I noticed that Bros and Swan each have their own transitions. And I actually have both of them in my flight plan. We go Vector, Swan, then Bros, then to our Juliet Airway. So that's probably a mistake. I picked that up because that was filed in SimBrief by a bunch of pilots. There might be a reason people like to go to Swan first. It certainly rounds the corner a little bit, but we sort of did a Swan transition when we could have just gone direct to Bros. Our arrival is Deer Park 3, and again that's another easy one. We're coming from Deer Park VOR, so that is our transition DPK, and it's pretty straightforward. The requirement is that we arrive greater than 11,000 feet, which we will with our cruise altitude of 37,000. ILSs are pretty easy. You'll arrive on a heading and at an altitude until you intercept the glide slope. So far, the CRJ has been really great, actually, at intercepting the glide slope. Every time I've tried, it's worked without drama. Alright, let's get that all programmed into the CDU. Okay, we could have done this before, but we'll put in our flight number now, so it's DL3556. And we'll paste that into the flight number field on the lower right. And when we do that, that shows up on the eCam display. In the upper right is a blue number there. That's easy to remember your flight number just by looking at the display. And now we are ready to start programming our CDU. So we'll start by hitting the departure arrival key to put us on our departures page. On the right are the runways, on the left are the departures. So we're going to depart from runway 19er center. and we're going to fly the Woolly 1 departure, so we'll have to hit the next page to page down through the options until we find it. There it is. And then they gave us Raza and Swan, so we're going to use the Swan transition. So we'll select Swan. Now we'll hit the legs key and make sure that all makes sense. That'll show us all the waypoints that we just selected, and hit execute. And now you can see the dashed lines became solid on our display because we've entered them. We'll go back to the flight plan page, hit next page, and begin entering our airways and waypoints. Our first waypoint after Swan is Bras, and that is direct. So we'll type Bras and put it on the right hand side, and it'll put direct. Our next one is an airway, so that's Juliet 42. So we'll put that on the left hand side. Our next one is Romeo Bravo Victor, put that on the right side. That's a VOR. Next is another airway, that's Juliet 222. That goes on the left hand side. Then we've got a VOR, Juliet Foxtrot Kilo, JFK. That goes on the right hand side. And then our last VOR is Delta Papa Kilo, which goes on the right hand side. Now we're not done yet. We have to do our arrival and approach. So let execute, enter those, go to departure arrival, and this is the departure page. So we gotta go down and tab over to the arrivals page for KBDL, and here's our arrivals. On the right hand side is the runway approach. We don't actually have that info yet. That will be given to us once we get to Bradley, but we'll put in what we expect, which is the ILS 24 approach. That's what we'd like. So we'll select that, and then SEL will come up. On the left hand side we'll do DPK3, and we're coming from DPK, so that's our transition. We'll hit execute. Back over to legs, and we'll tab through all of these to make sure they make sense, and we'll also look for discontinuities, which will show up with a bunch of boxes. There's our first one. So we're going to copy DPK and paste it over the discontinuity. We'll keep going. We'll copy the next waypoint and paste that over the discontinuity before it. And that's all of them. Looks good. We'll just page back to make sure that we've got everything. And hit execute. That's our flight plan. It's now entered. The next item is preferences. So we're going to hit the MFD menu key and verify that airport speed and altitude are selected. Now I actually find the airports to be distracting, so I'm going to turn them off. That's all the little blue dots there. And I'm going to turn on VNAV, which will give me my VNAV information on the PFD. That's how I like it. Next we'll go to the next page and verify that Alt Select is green. Then we'll hit the perf key, and then perf init, and we'll configure all of our weights along with our cruise altitude. So we are cruising at flight level 370, so we'll put that for cruise altitude in the top right. And now we can enter all of the weights manually here just by typing them in, or we can use Aerosoft's EFB. So if we go to the Performance tab here, it has a weights screen, and we'll just leave these at the defaults. You can modify them to be whatever's in SimBrief if you'd like. And then click on the button here to copy all of those over to the screen. Much easier. We'll hit next page and enter the average winds. You can get this from SimBrief. I'll pop up the overlay here from SimBrief so you can see where to find that, and you type that in as a slash. So it's going to be a direction and a wind speed. We'll hit execute, and then next page, verify that our reserve fuel looks good. That does, no changes, so we're good. Back over to the EFB, and from there we're going to look up what our takeoff trim needs to be. That's the green number here on the lower left. It's 7.2. over here on the right are our V speeds, and I can set these manually. Let me get up the panel lights here a little bit first. So if I zoom in, it's a little hidden behind the controls, but there's a select key above the speed key, and if I click that, I can toggle through the different V speeds and then use the knob to manually set V1, VR, V2. It's easier just to do set all from the EFB, which will copy in all of your target speeds without you having to fiddle with the knob. Now back to the takeoff trim, that's 7.2, that's on the display right here. And I'm just going to use the actual trim control that I have on my throttle quadrant to adjust that until it's 7.2. Next we'll head over to the autopilot. Our CID had some restrictions. So we're going to fly heading 191 on departure, and we are climbing to 3,000. So we can dial those in now. If I go over to the heading control, I can dial in my heading, and you'll see a purple line swing there across the display as I start dialing it in. So we'll keep dialing that in until we get to 191. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the altitude. The altitude number is on the left-hand PFD. It's in the upper right corner. It's in purple. So I'm going to dial that until I get to 3,000. And then the last thing I'll do is adjust my speed. So I will dial in my speed restriction of 250 below 10,000 feet. That's underneath the V1, V2, VR speeds on the leftmost display there in purple. Next we have to set the landing elevation, which is tricky because you have to look at the PFD while simultaneously looking at the overhead panel. To do that, we're going to Alt right click on the PFD display and that will pop it out. Any display can be popped out that way. There you go. So we can see the landing elevation in the lower right in blue, and now we're going to go to the overhead and dial the landing elevation dial to get the departure airport's elevation. So we're taking off from Washington Dulles, which is 313. I'm going to put in 320 because it goes up by 20s. So my options are 300 or 320. Let's have a look outside. Everybody is on board and all of the baggage has been loaded. So I think we're ready for pushback. Now the only way to close the doors is on the EFB display here, but there is a doors page for your ECAM, so we'll take a look at that and see that they are all opened. Now we'll head back to the EFB, and I'm going to click on each door to close it up. Now in my last video when I did this flight I left, I left the baggage door open, which wasn't good. And you can see now just the passenger door is open, so I'll go and close that. Then we'll go back to the doors display, make sure that it all looks good. It does. And now you'll hear a built-in announcement from the flight crew.
The cabin is secure. All passengers are aboard.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the captain and crew, welcome aboard this flight. We hopefully enjoy flying with
2414 at Yankee 7, give way to the United 737 entering the
Dulles ground, Delta 3556, request pushback. Cleared for pushback, face west, Delta 3556. Make sure that you also have the chocks removed. Those are on the EFB. I always forget to do that. So we'll go over here and click that button to take those off. There's also a control in the lower left-hand corner to bring up the passenger area lighting inside of the plane. So I will click on that and bring up the lights for the passengers so that it's not so dark for our screenshots when we're looking outside of the airplane. We'll head up to the overhead. We'll get on fuel boost left, right. So click both of those. We'll turn pump 3A on, and we'll turn the beacon on because we're getting ready to move. Last thing we'll do is verify that the nose wheel steering still is not armed. There's a really excellent freeware pushback mod on flightsim.to called Pushback Toolbar. However, it doesn't seem to work correctly with the CRJ. At least it didn't for me. The CRJ got stuck like the brakes were on, so I'm just using the in-game pushback for this. There's a bit of an art to judging with the in-game pushback system, and I feel a sense of accomplishment if I end up anywhere near the taxiway line. Okay, pushback is complete. We've got our parking brake set again. So we're going to start our engines. Technically you can start them during pushback, but I find it a bit much to manage. So we'll head up here and we're going to press the engine right start button. That'll turn white. Then we'll watch the engine start up. So we're looking for N2 to be greater than 20 and ITT to be less than 120. Once N2 hits 20, we're going to head down to the right thrust lever, unlock it by flipping the red handle down and then moving it to the idle position. So there's the red handle, and we're going to slide that forward to idle. There we go. Now we're going to watch the engine continue to start up. There's a little black button on the thrust lever that puts it in toga mode, and I accidentally bumped it. It's very easy to bump, so you'll see the TO pop up on the BFD. Once the engine fully starts up, you'll see the cautions disappear from that engine, and it'll also trigger the safety review from the flight attendants.
Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention as we display the safety features and procedures of the aircraft in case of an emergency. During an emergency, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened and your seats in the upright position. In case of a drop in cabin,
We'll head up and get the left engine started. Same procedure.
During the evacuation of the aircraft, the walkway emergency lights will display to the exits, which are located here and here. In case of an extreme emergency landing, you will be instructed to get into the brace position, which is executed by placing your head between your knees with your hands over your head. We would also like to remind you that you should turn off all electronic devices. We thank you for paying attention during this brief presentation.
Alaska 922 Dulles ground, continue Alpha, hold short of Alpha 1, contact ramp tower 119.12, 1912.
So I'm daydreaming listening to the safety announcement here, and I realized, why is it stuck at 20%? And it's because I never flipped the engine into idle. There we go. Put that in idle. That'll inject fuel and take it the rest of the way up for a full startup.
Monitor tower 134.42, safe flight.
And woohoo! With both engines fully started, the last caution disappears, the blinking master caution light extinguishes, and the airplane is happy. So we're going to head up and get the anti-ice for the cowl left and right, both of those switches on. Looks good.
5663, they haven't received a new route yet, but it has been called in. Engine management is at your discretion.
Now we're going to head down and get the flaps to the takeoff setting. So we are taking off with flaps 8.
Alright, I think we'll go ahead and shut them down here.
On the ECAM control panel, on the lower left, we're going to press flight control and bring up the flight control page so we can do our flight controls test. So now we'll take a look at the display on the right and do forward, back, left, right, rudder left, rudder right. That all looks good. And now it is finally time to arm the nose wheel steering. Make sure you do that, or you're not going to be able to steer with the nose wheel. It's raining pretty good, so I've also got the wipers turned on. That switch is in the lower left here, and you can control the speed just like on your car. So we'll turn that up a little bit. Let's get our ECAM back on the status page. So to the controls, hit Stat, because we're going to need to verify that everything is cleared. Now we'll head back up to the overhead. Okay, we'll verify that air conditioning, Pack 1, Pack 2 are on. We'll press Stop for the APU and Stop for the fuel. We'll go down to the ECAM, and you'll watch on the right hand as the APU powers down, its graphic will turn off. That looks good. Now we'll head back up to the overhead, and we'll turn on the nose light and the recog light, which is the taxi light. Dulles ground, Delta 3556 with information India, ready to taxi. Taxi and hold short, runway 19er center via Yankee 7 Yankee Zulu, Delta 3556. We'll get our parking brake off, and we are good to go. You may notice the windshield wipers don't actually do anything. It would be cool if they cleared off the raindrops. But I still like the rain effects. It looks pretty cool flying out of here on a rainy day. I like that the flight crew announcements are aware of the aircraft's position, so as we got nearer to the runway, it triggered that announcement. Okay, let's get our parking brake on. We'll head up to the overhead. We'll get our landing lights on. We'll turn our strobes on. And then normally the fuel is gravity fed between the left and the right. We're going to put that into manual mode just due to all the maneuvers we have to do on takeoff.
Commuter 4929, got your 4-hour clearance now. You're cleared up to Newark. Jerry's to departure. Jerry's. Jet 220 to Foxtrot Oscar Romeo Tango Tango.
For low visibility takeoffs and landings, there's a built-in head-up display, so we'll click that to rotate that down. Now it overlays the horizon along with all of our metrics. Pretty cool, huh? Alright, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into how to start up the CRJ. It's a real beast and it takes a bit of time to learn how to do everything. Aerosoft has a series of videos by the dude, so if you search for him in YouTube you'll find him, and he goes into much more detail than I went here if you really want to go hardcore. But this should get you on your way. So if you enjoy content like this, be sure to click that like button, leave me a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, as always, for flying along with me, and stay tuned for further flight adventures.